Welcome to Ask Resource Center, Waiver Services in Iowa, Home and Community-Based Services. HCBS is the acronym. And Alicia, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. Well, welcome. Good afternoon, and thank you again for being here. Before we move into our presentation for today, I just want to do a quick little plug for Ask. Perhaps some of you are new to our webinars, or you're not sure what Ask is or what we do to serve the state. And so I thought I would just very quickly provide an overview of how we serve families and professionals throughout the state of Iowa. So Ask is Iowa's Parent Training and Information Center. Through this grant, we strive to support families of children with special needs as they navigate the special education system, as well as connecting them with resources in their communities to help children get the services that they need. Additionally, Ask holds another grant, which is the Family to Family Health Information Grant. And that really focuses on children and youth with special health care needs. So really, that's where this webinar comes into play today. We have many families and professionals that reach out to us with questions about waiver services and how to apply for a waiver. And so we saw that as a great need. And we worked diligently over a good number of months to develop some additional resources available to families to help understand what a waiver is, how to navigate applying for a waiver, how to understand it once you're on a waiver. And so that's what has landed us here today. And so without further ado, I'm going to move into the presentation. And I'll start with some learning objectives. And so what I hope you will gain today is just maybe a takeaway about home and community-based services waiver programs that are available in Iowa. Hopefully more than one takeaway. I hope that as participants, you will grow in your understanding about accessing waiver services for an individual in Iowa. And then I hope that as we lead you through this document that we've created, these frequently asked questions that we receive from many families typically, that you will glean something from this document and from our presentation today to help either you navigate as a family member, or if you're a professional on here today, to help families navigate some of those things once you're on the waiver. And so at this time, my colleague is going to drop in the chat a direct link to the document that I'll be reviewing today, which is our frequently asked questions around waiver services. You can also access it on the Ask website at any time. It would be under our resources tab, and then under that, under the health section. So quickly, this may be old hat to some of you, and this may be brand new to others. So I just want to quickly provide kind of an explanation of what HCBS waiver services are. So that stands for Home and Community-Based Services, and they are available for people with disabilities and older Iowans who need services that really allow them to stay in their homes and in their own communities, rather than going into more of an institutionalized setting. So that's the whole premise behind waiver programs. In Iowa, if you have a physical, mental, or emotional health condition, you may apply for an HCBS waiver. And so we actually have 7 waiver programs in the state of Iowa. And again, you're going to hear me keep saying in the state of Iowa. That's because waiver programs are different from state to state. How you apply is different. Eligibility is different. So I'm really speaking specifically to what's available in Iowa. So again, just a quick review of the programs available here in our state. There are 7. And these waivers, again, provide service funding and individualized supports that allow eligible members to remain in their own homes and their own communities. So the 7 waivers include health and disability, often referred to as the HD waiver, brain injury or the BI waiver, intellectual disability or the ID waiver, children's mental health or the CMH waiver, physical disability, AIDS and HIV waiver, and the elderly waiver. The top 4 are typically the ones we get the most calls about, and that I would say most children and youth in our state are served under. But there are 3 additional ones that I wanted to draw your attention to. It's important to note that in addition to the services provided through HCBS waiver programs, Members who are enrolled in a waiver program have access to Medicaid covered health services and benefits, which also limits the out-of-pocket costs for families. For this reason, HCBS waiver programs are sometimes referred to as Medicaid waiver programs. So you kind of hear that used interchangeably. So before we go very much further into the presentation, I just want to pause for a minute, and I'm hoping you'll have access to the chat so that you can kind of just plug in there, help us know, our audience, which one of these most applies to you. And maybe it's more than one, and that's okay too. So A, my child is currently accessing one of the waivers. B, my child is on the wait list for one of the waivers. C, my child is not currently on a waiver, but I plan to apply. Or D, I am a professional that serves individuals on a waiver. So I'll give you just a minute to do that. As I shared, our goal today is to explore and learn from some of the most frequently asked questions that we receive from families. We have a companion document also that we'll talk about a little further into the presentation that's all about how to actually apply for the waivers. This, again, really focuses on the questions we receive around waivers once you're already on a waiver, or at least on the wait list. But we also did work to create a document that really helps individuals understand how to go about that application process, because it is a very daunting or can be a very daunting thing. And so we want to make it easy for families and those who serve our families. All right.
It looks like, Alicia, it's a variety. I mean, they have 3 kids, A, B, and B, D, D, A, C, and D. So we have a variety of all 4 letters.
Great. That's good to know. And so I would assume if you're a professional on here, you are in a profession where you are serving families and children with disabilities. And so I think it's very helpful that you are on here to learn. We often will get calls too, and it breaks my heart. You know, they might be 14 and they're like, well, we've never heard of a waiver. And so, you know, maybe years have gone by when they could have been accessing some different services. And families just aren't aware of it. So the more we can help professionals know about it and how to help guide those families to apply, the better we're able to serve those clients across the state as well. All right, we're going to move right into our frequently asked questions. And again, these are just the questions that we get most often from families and professionals. The first one is, do I need to have documentation about my child's disability before applying for a waiver? And the answer is no, you do not. There are specific criteria or eligibility requirements for each waiver program. For example, the brain injury waiver is for individuals who have been diagnosed with a brain injury due to an accident or illness. And in order to apply for that waiver, you also have to be at least 1 month of age. So there are certain criteria and eligibility requirements for each of the waivers. You can find that information both on our website and it's from the Department of Health and Human Services, but it is linked on our site under health and in the waiver section. And that's a document called our Home and Community-Based Waiver Services Right for You. The HD waiver is unique. I do want to draw attention to this because, again, while you don't have to have documentation of disability up front in order to apply for a waiver, the HD waiver, the health and disability waiver, is unique in that there is a disability determination that's needed in order for the individual to move to the waiting list. And here's what that means. You would apply if you believe your child might be eligible for the health and disability waiver. You would apply just as you would for any other any other waiver. But once your application is received by the Department of Health and Human Services, they will mail you out a form titled Disability Report for Children. Now, what we have been told is it's very important that this paperwork, this disability report for children paperwork, be completed by the date that is indicated or noted in the letter. If it's not, then what we've been told is, you know, your application is no longer valid. So if you are applying for the HD waiver, once your application is received by the Department of Health and Human Services, they will send out that disability report paperwork. It should indicate very clearly on that paperwork when you need to have that submitted by. And it's typically a quick turnaround. So pay attention to that. If you do need an extension, we've been told that you can call and get kind of a deferral if you need a little bit more time. That is specific, again, to the health and disability waiver. And our document, our companion document, will talk about that even more in depth. But for all other waivers that you're applying for, you do not need to have documentation of disability until a waiver slot actually opens up. All right, can my child be on more than one waiver at a time? And the answer to that is no. A child cannot access more than one waiver at a time. However, you can have a child or an individual on a waiting list, on more than one waiting list at a time. Or, for example, they could be accessing one waiver. Let's say that they're on the HD waiver and on the wait list for the ID waiver. So you cannot actively access more than one waiver at a time, but there is you are allowed to be on more than one wait list. We do recommend, I want to point this out, that let's say that in that example, you're on the HD, your child is on the HD waiver, and you really feel like the intellectual disability waiver would support them better. And so you apply for the ID waiver. You want to make sure that you keep your child on the HD waiver, whatever waiver they're actively on, keep them on that waiver until a slot opens up and they're found eligible for the other waiver. Being on one waiver does not allow you to skip any wait lists or anything like that. So you want to make sure to get coverage and those HCBS services, that you keep them actively on their current waiver. And we'll get into that a little bit more when we talk about some upcoming questions. So this one in particular, can I switch my child to a different waiver? And the answer is yes, but you do have to follow the same process to apply for a different waiver. It's important to note, again, that being on a waiver currently does not allow you to skip the wait list if you wish to move to another waiver. So once you apply for the new waiver, you will want to, again, remain on the current waiver until a slot opens up for the waiver you wish to move your child to. Next, we are often asked, what can I expect after waiver eligibility is determined? And so before I go into what you can expect after eligibility is determined, I want to back up a step and let's talk about what happens when a slot opens up. So as you will read in our companion document, you apply. Almost always you're given a letter, a notice of decision that says you've been denied. What that really means is that there are no slots open on that waiver, and so your child is moved to the waiting list. So you're on this waiting list and then a slot opens up. You're contacted usually a couple months ahead of time, as we understand it, by the Department of Health and Human Services, telling you that a slot has opened up for your child on the waiver waiting list. At that time, you will be either assigned a managed care organization, or an MCO as they're often referred to, or fee for service. Most individuals will be assigned a managed care organization. The MCOs available in Iowa currently include Iowa Total Care and AmeriGroup. As I understand it, beginning in July of this year, 2023, Molina Healthcare of Iowa will be the third option for a managed care organization that you might be assigned to. Next, the level of care assessment is done by either the internal source through an MCO, or if you were assigned fee for service, then they contract with a company called Telligent. So either way, whether you're with an MCO or fee for service, the next step is really to determine that level of care. And so once those assessments are done, either internally by an MCO or through Telligent, if you're with fee for service, those assessments are then sent to the Department of Health and Human Services. And it is the Department of Health and Human Services that determines the individual is eligible or not eligible. And then secondly, they determine the level of care. At that point, then you come, let's say that the individual is determined eligible, you would come together with your care team. And at that time, knowing the level of care that has been decided by the Department of Health and Human Services, the team, which includes parents, will develop a care plan. Okay, they will consider all of the different services that might be needed. and what's available to that individual, and they work together to develop that care plan. The team can meet once a year or more frequently if needed. And so it's similar to an IEP team where you're going to meet at least once a year. But if anybody on that team, typically it would be families, members, or the member themselves, you can request to have your care team come together at any point if you want to discuss maybe changes in services or for any other reason. So it's a little more complicated than just a simple answer. So hopefully I clarified that a little bit. Another question we get is, how do I find out who my child's case manager is? Or, I've called and I can't get a hold of anybody, or I'm not even sure who my child's case manager is. Our answer to that is that when you first receive your notice of eligibility for Medicaid, you should have a letter that you've received, and at the top of that, it should note who your case manager is. As we know, case management can change, however, and so if you are unable to determine, or if you're a professional working with a family and you're unable to help them determine who the case manager is, or if you're unable to reach your case manager, you can contact, if you've been assigned an MCO, which again, most people are assigned an MCO, you can contact MCO's member services or Medicaid member services if you have been assigned a fee for service. The population that is assigned a fee for service, we get into this in our companion document, but it's a much smaller population. It's those families that are accessing the HIP program, which we have an upcoming webinar on, and then some other populations that tend to be assigned fee for service. So again, most of the families are going to be assigned an MCO or a managed care organization. And so directly linked on our document, the frequently asked questions document, is a member services contact directory from the Iowa Department of Health and Human Services. And you can use that to contact member services. All right, moving on. Who is a part of my child's care team? Similar to an IEP or an individualized education program team, a care team is going to include the member, so the individual accessing the waiver and their family, the case manager, and then as well as any other providers that people close to the individual wish to have be a part of the team. So let's say that that child has or accesses psychiatry services, and maybe the parent feels like it's very important that that provider be a part of the upcoming discussion or the meeting when the care team is coming together. The family or the member has the right to include anybody that they choose to be a part of that care team. But it should minimally be the case manager and the member and the family. What are some of the responsibilities of a case manager? So this is, again, something that, maybe families just aren't sure, what can I expect from my case manager? What should they be working on? There's really, this is not an exhaustive list of things that case managers do, but some of the things that they do, once that level of need or level of care is determined by HHS, there's ongoing discussion with the care team. They help guide that discussion with the care team about that individual's level of need, because sometimes the level of need can change. They help develop the care plan. So your case manager is going to be an integral part of helping develop what that care plan looks like. They help navigate support services that might be available. It's their role to connect the member with resources that are available. This is especially important in a rural state like Iowa, where it might be more difficult to navigate what's available to that individual in their area. Or maybe they need to navigate services that are not directly in their area, but that's really a responsibility of the case managers to help know of those services and how to access those services. The case manager is also going to help obtain needed services and authorize needed services. All right, next, Do I have a choice in the provider we use for services? And the answer to that is always yes. Families and the individual should have a choice in their direct service providers. If you're only, if you're working with a traditional waiver provider or an agency and they're only giving you the option of one provider, that might be a red flag. And you certainly have the right as families to say, who else is out there? What other providers are out there that we might be able to consider? So families can choose a traditional waiver provider or agency, as I just mentioned, that is contracted through the state. Some examples of these agencies might include Respite Connection or Child Serve, something like that, where they are contracted through the state to help connect families and case management with those services. Or there is an option to use CCO or consumer choice options. When using CCO or consumer choice options, the family or individual is able to hire and train their own staff. In this case, the family would need to work with an independent support broker. If CCO is something you'd like to know more about, or if you are interested in pursuing that as a possible option, I would encourage you to get on our website under the events tab and register. Next week, we have somebody who will be coming, Joy Barleen will be coming and talking about CCO as an option for families. And please get registered for that webinar because she'll definitely dive deeper into what is CCO and how do we access it. It's also important to mention that families can utilize both CCO and traditional waiver providers, such as Child Serve or Respite Connection. Those are just two that I'm mentioning. So always, though, families should have a choice in who their direct service providers are. Sometimes things don't go as expected, and maybe you are not happy as a family member or as the individual with how a notice of decision has been presented. Maybe there is a denial of services. So the question we get is, how do I appeal a notice of decision, often referred to as an NOD, or a denial of services? There are a couple different ways. If you disagree, you can either appeal the decision or you can file an exception to policy. And you're welcome to do this on your own, but also that's one more of those things that a case manager can help with. So you can contact your case manager, kind of talk through that notice of decision and maybe what you were denied services on, and talk about whether an appeal is most appropriate or maybe filing for an exception to policy. It's also important to note here that in the very beginning, if you have applied for a waiver and your child is not found eligible, so they're denied eligibility, and again, that's not meaning that they've moved to the wait list, but let's say a slot opens up and they're considering eligibility and the Department of Health and Human Services says, no, they are not eligible for a waiver. That is also a time when a family can file an appeal. You can disagree with that. All right. What can I do if I have concerns about the services and supports being provided through the waiver? The very first thing you really want to do is start by communicating your concerns with your child's case manager. They're going to know the direction to go based on what those specific concerns are. You also do, if you're with an MCO or a managed care organization, you have the option of filing a grievance. That information should be available to you in your MCO member handbook. Another option we want to mention is the Managed Care Ombudsman Program. You can Google that and learn a little bit more about what the Ombudsman Program is and how that might be able to assist you when you are unhappy about something or concerned about how something is being provided or maybe not being provided. So again, we would encourage you first to start by communicating with your child's case manager, but then you do have those other options as well. All right, we're moving on to our last question. Again, these questions are not all inclusive of the questions we get. We just chose the more common questions that we receive. And this really became a question we heard a lot during the pandemic, but we still hear it. And so, can waiver services be used for childcare or to replace special education services in an individualized education program? And the answer to both of those is no. While there were some exceptions to the childcare piece during the pandemic, generally waiver services cannot be a replacement for childcare. That is seen as a responsibility of the family to secure childcare. And so waiver services should not and cannot be used to replace childcare. Likewise, special education services would be the responsibility of the school. So if the IEP has determined that a child needs a specific service, that is the obligation of the school to provide that service. It should not be that we're using waiver services in place of special education services. So that is pretty clear that the answer to those is typically no. All of the extensions, as we understand that were allowable regarding the childcare piece during the pandemic, have come to an end. So at this time, no, waiver services cannot be a replacement for childcare nor special education services. And so I mentioned at the beginning, and now I'm going to show you again, this is just a quick screenshot of the additional resource that our team worked diligently on because we knew it was a needed resource in our state. And that's just kind of trying to simplify, how do you go about applying for a waiver in Iowa? So this is the companion document that I've been mentioning. My colleague Sarah is going to drop that in the chat right now too. Again, you can always find that on our website. The waiver application can be a really confusing process. People aren't always sure if they should apply, if it's worth their time. This document will really kind of guide you through the reasons you might want to apply, and then how to make it as painful as possible. And so the good news is you can apply for more than one waiver at a time, just using one application. This document will go into that further. Sarah's also going to link another resource that we have on our website. It's another Ask an Expert called Home and Community-Based Waiver Services. We partnered some time ago with one of our community partners, Lacey Genta, who is with Respite Connection, and she leads that webinar and really kind of walks through how to do the application process. So I would encourage you to check that out, as well as these two resources that we've shared about today. And I'm guessing we have questions. So we will move into questions, but before we do that, I just want to share that we are very glad you were here today. We appreciate working with families and professionals to make sure that children we know are getting everything that they need and deserve. We certainly understand, again, that this process can be very confusing. And then even once you're on a waiver, it can be difficult to know exactly how to navigate it. So please know that we are here to help if you don't know the answer. We can help you figure out the answer or get you to somebody who might know the answer. Families and professionals alike, you have the opportunity to complete an intake for one-on-one assistance on our website. So if you have more specific questions, we'll kind of answer general questions today, but if you have more specific questions to your child, we encourage you to complete that one-on-one intake on our website. Additionally, if you could please take just a moment to fill out our survey. I believe the survey will be sent out to you as well following the webinar. This helps us. We really use your feedback to do better and to know what to provide in the future as far as information and webinars. But it also importantly helps us continue to receive our funding to support families and professionals alike. So with that, I'll turn it over to Deb.
Alicia, we had Donna ask, is this addressing adult HD waivers, those 27 plus?
Great question. So, and I may have not mentioned this, but at Ask, we serve both to age 26. And so really when we create our documents, it's focused around those age groups. Absolutely, the application process is going to be the same, regardless of the age of the individual. And so to her point, these waivers are not only waivers for accessible to children and youth. So many of the waivers, with the exception of the children's mental health waiver, many of them extend into adulthood. And so absolutely, the application process would be the same regardless of the age of the individual. So you can certainly hop on and access that document that we referenced. This particular FAQ might have some pieces that would apply to adults, but really our focus was on serving children and youth.
A couple more questions. Wait lists. We don't know how long the wait lists are, but isn't there a way that they can look that up?
There is, and I believe we linked that directly. Let me double check. There is a link that you can access on the Department of Health and Human Services website, also linked to the Ask website, where you can find, not specific to like your child's name, but if you know this key piece of information, if you remember the month and the year that you applied for the waiver, you can look up, specifically, let's say you're on the wait list for the HD waiver. You can look at the HD waiver and see they are currently looking at applications from January 2020. So it kind of gives you a better idea of where they're at on the wait list that way. You should receive contact from the Department of Health and Human Services at least, a month or so in advance of a slot opening up to kind of let you know that it's coming. I think they're generally pretty good about that, but let me see. Maybe Sarah, you have it handy too. I don't think we are careful to not direct link things in our documents too often, because we can't, be responsible for if other agencies change their links. We don't want you to get a link that's not working. And so I don't think we linked that specific link, but if you go to our website, the Ask website, you're going to want to search the resources tab, go to health, and then you could even just either scroll through the different waiver documents on our site, or you can just search in the search bar Medicaid wait list or waiver wait list, and that should hopefully bring up that information. Hopefully that helps.
Yes,
I did link it in the chat as well.
Oh, thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
We have another question from Mara. I have clients who are on a habilitation and BI at the same time. Is this because habilitation is not under the waiver list?
So that was one of those things that was very confusing to us as we were learning and navigating more about this. Our understanding is that habilitation is something you can access once you're on one of the other waivers. And so habilitation habilitation services is going to be a very small population of people who receive habilitation services. I believe we also have information linked from the Department of Health and Human Services on our website specifically about habilitation services. And our understanding again is that the child or the individual, and typically it isn't, it's not going to be a young child, it's going to be an older youth or even into adulthood that's accessing habilitation services. And that is going to only be available potentially after you've been on another waiver program. Did that answer your question, or was there a second part to that?
The same person asks, I'm believing it's a professional, can I apply before I receive my Medicaid denial letter? That was all within kind of her information.
Apply for the waiver?
It doesn't say, oh,
Okay.
Can I apply before I receive my Medicaid denial letter is all that it says.
So I'm not sure if this answers that specific question, but I do want to, draw attention to the waiver programs. I caught myself doing it, the Medicaid waiver programs or home and community-based waiver service programs. Remember, they're all the same thing that we're talking about. Those, even if you have been denied straight Medicaid, so let's say that you're not eligible, you don't meet those income requirements for Medicaid, waivers are different. They are not income dependent. There's not income guidelines that would deny you.
Alicia, and that ties into another question, so I just want to hit it.
Yep.
Sarah's asking, Sarah Becker, are there income limits when applying for waiver? Should the income be that of the parent or just the income of the child? So I just see all of those together, if you wouldn't mind addressing that.
Great question. And our applying for a waiver in Iowa document addresses that specifically, like when you're filling out the application, whose income you should include. If you are applying for a waiver and you're applying for, say, your 8-year-old, you are filling out that paperwork as though you are the 8-year-old, if that makes sense. And to answer your first question, waiver programs are not income dependent. So it's different than applying for straight Medicaid. So even if you've been denied Medicaid, let's say you applied for Medicaid and you've received the denial because you don't meet the income guidelines, that does not mean that you will be denied waiver program. Hopefully that helps.
Well, thank you, everyone. I agree. It's been great to have you on today, and so many questions. As you know, it's complicated, and so we just touched on the surface. Again, the best thing to do is work directly with, if you have a case manager, or directly with whoever you've been working with for specific questions around your child or your situation. Happy 2023. Thank you.
Thank you.